It's a bonus episode here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to this bonus episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily updates, Monday through Friday episodes, and sometimes our extra episodes that come out on the weekend, along with our breaking news. Now, I'm doing this episode because it's the weekend before the draft, and I've had a lot of questions from you guys coming into our call-in number. And again, the number is 412-223-6644. If you get your question in, I do try to answer it. There's some that I can't get to all the time, especially on the show. So what I'm going to try to do when I have time on weekends is do an extra episode to get it out and get some of the questions out of the way that I know I probably won't be able to get in before that question's kind of null and void, like a lot of the draft questions that are coming up with the Steelers picking on Thursday. So with that being said, wanted to dive right into some of your questions. We're going to try to do 8 questions in this show, and it's going to stem from, pre-draft questions, general Steelers questions, anything that's been asked. So I want to thank everyone who called in and asked questions, and we'll get to the first one. This first caller calls in on Louis Riddick. We got our Steven from Northern Kentucky. Take a listen.
Hey, Chris, this is Steve from Northern Kentucky, which is very close to Cincinnati. We don't claim that being Steelers fans down here. But anyway, what's the deal with our new GM? Our main man, Kevin, will be out after the draft, and there's no news on the successor. There's no news at all past interviewing Louis Riddick. Any help would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, Chris. Love the show.
Thanks, Steve, for your question. And that's a good question because that's a big part of what's being talked about with the Steelers is, who's going to take over for Kevin Colbert. Now, I will say there has been news about since Louis Riddick being interviewed by the Steelers, and that there were about 13 to 15, or a whole bunch of guys that they've talked to at some point during this process. But I'll tell you straight up, I think that all of this has just been the Steelers kicking the tires on guys, establishing relationships, maintaining relationships with guys who they might be interested in the future, just doing the business thing to do, the right business thing to do in talking to people. I truly think the pick is going to be Brandon Hunt. It would be a very Steelers move. I know some people are like, oh, an internal hire, but listen, when was the last time the Steelers hired internally for the GM position? Exactly. It hasn't happened because Kevin Colbert was hired back in 2000 and they haven't changed since. The reason it adds up for Brandon Hunt to take over at the GM position, it just makes a lot of sense because A, he's been Kevin Colbert's right-hand man. He knows what's going on. B, a lot of the things that have been rumored, that some of the latest moves, that are some of the bigger moves, he's been very much a part of, especially trading to the first-round pick to get Minkah Fitzpatrick. I'd say that worked out pretty well. C, this guy knows the organization. He's been outside the organization. He came back to the organization. They appreciate that about him. D, this guy knows the history of the organization. I think there's something to value about that. When you talk to people around the organization, they talk about how this guy knows the Steelers. He knows the front office. And when you talk to him, he'll tell you stories about Bill Nunn, the very scout himself, who was a big part, played a big part in putting together the 70 Steelers and finding all the great HBCU players that built that roster, and stayed on with the Steelers for decades after and learned under Bill Nunn. So you got a guy who learned under Kevin Colbert, was his right-hand man, learned under Bill Nunn. Why not bring that guy back? And I guarantee if they don't give him the job, he's going to go somewhere else. So I think you stay in-house, you get Brandon Hunt, you promote him up, and that's how that works. But that's why you haven't heard from it. Now, the question really is, what would Kevin Colbert be giving Brandon Hunt next year? What kind of a roster? What kind of picks? Let's take a question about an idea that one of our listeners had about how to help maybe Brandon Hunt in his first year next year when he presumably would take over the GM position. Here's Law from Norristown.
Hey, this is Law. I watch the show every day. Thanks for always keeping me updated. But my question is, I'm from Norristown, Pennsylvania. My question is, do you think it'll be a wise idea for the Steelers to, trade down to the early or the second round and like only if all of our, main, I guess, interior defensive linemen, cornerbacks, all of our top guys are off the board. What about trading back into the second round, get a first round pick for next year? So we'll have 2 first round picks next year, and then we can go, cornerback, wide receiver, cornerback in the third or something like that. Let me know and get back at me. Hey, go Steelers.
Thank you for the question there, and it's a good question, Law. But I do think that there's a possibility the Steelers definitely trade back. I've talked about that on the show a few times. Certainly, you look at what the Steelers have available to them, and you look at it's going to be about what falls to them at 20 or who falls to them at 20. If Jordan Davis is there, they're not trading back. If Kyle Hamilton's there, he's not going to be there. But if one of the guys their dreams is sitting there who they value in that top 20 pick right there, they're absolutely taking it. But say the board falls a certain way and they're like, you know what, the receivers we really wanted are gone, the defensive linemen we really want are gone, the corners that we really want are gone, the quarterbacks we really want are gone. Why not trade back? And I do think that's very much a possibility. And when you're trading back, maybe you are getting picks for next year. Maybe you are loading up. That's why I included the picture of Bryce Young, because I do think if there's a way that Kevin Colbert could get some really good players for the Steelers in this draft and help their draft capital for the future to maybe get that future franchise quarterback, he'd love to be make that an ending part of his legacy. But I also know he'd love to add some supreme playmakers. Now, there's been some questions as far as, the Steelers' plan of attack, whereas on this show, we've kind of accepted that Mitch Trubisky was the quarterback they signed. We've kind of talked about their plans right now, but some people feel like if the Steelers really were close, they made the playoffs last year and Ben Roethlisberger was the worst version of himself that we've seen in his entire career, why didn't the Steelers go get a quarterback? Here's Corey from Erie, Pennsylvania asking that very question.
Hi, Chris. Big fan of the show. My name is Corey from Erie, Pennsylvania. I have a question about how we're not just a quarterback away from competing for a Super Bowl. I think that we have an elite defense, minus obviously strong safety. I think Najee Harris is an excellent running back. I think we have 2 decent receivers, and I think what we've done with the offensive line has really bolstered our offense. I don't understand how we're not we didn't get a Russell Wilson or a Deshaun Watson, but I think with those players, we could have been a Super Bowl contender. Thanks for the time.
And thank you, Corey, for your question. Now, here's my whole thing about this. I get the excitement of adding a Russell Wilson, and I do think that would have made the Steelers an interesting contender, but I think Russell Wilson would have given you a very limited lifespan with him as quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, as well as made it tougher to address a lot of the different weaknesses on the team. If you sign Russell Wilson, it would have been a lot harder to make a lot of the different moves that they've made because he would have taken up so much of the salary cap. And that's part of what I think the Steelers are trying to take advantage of right now, is this is the first time since 2005, 2006, 2007 that they've not had a quarterback under a major contract like they've had Ben Roethlisberger since he signed his first non-rookie contract, which I believe he did it so in 2008. So that's big money. That's something to always consider when you have a franchise quarterback. They're going to take up, it's just the market for quarterbacks. They're going to take up a large chunk of your salary cap. And when you have that happen, you start to find weaknesses on the team. You're not able to replenish the defense as quickly. You're not able to keep up the offensive line sometimes, or you're forced to commit to certain areas. Say, hey, we're going to be really strong around these areas with this quarterback, and we're just going to go with that. That's why the Steelers of the 2010, the mid 2010s, didn't have a great defense. Their old defense aged out. They were trying to get first round draft picks in there to try to build up that defense without paying for it in free agency. And they were able to hit it running back and wide receiver in the offensive line. So they said, we're just going to load up on offense and see what happens on defense. And now, so the offense was kind of that unit that carried the team for a while. Now the pendulum is swinging backwards. It's the defense. But here's my thing. I still think the team is more than just a quarterback away. You look at the run defense, they got to figure things out there. They might have, if Devin Bush can get back to it. We saw some videos of him working out that looked kind of cool with his quick feet and everything, that he was putting it back together, looking more confident with after the ACL injury that he rehabbed last year, but didn't get to really train as much in the summer. And there is a big difference between those two. But you also have Myles Jack that you've added to the mix. You probably don't get him if you sign a Russell Wilson. You're still trying to figure out a big contract for Minkah Fitzpatrick. They brought back Terrell Edmonds for the cheap that you probably could have done with Russell Wilson. But point being, they're trying to figure out a lot of different things. They kept Ahkello Witherspoon. They signed Levi Wallace. And now they've balanced out the roster so that in this draft, you can't just predict where they're going for sure. They could go quarterback. They could go cornerback. They could go defensive line. They could go safety. They could go linebacker. They could go wide receiver. They could go a bunch of different directions. And that makes it tough for teams to say, hey, we know the Steelers are going here, so we're going to trade up ahead of them specifically because we know that that's the direction because of that's the big hole in their roster. So that's what they tried to avoid. I think they did that. And this way, here's how it'll happen is that they have a much better chance of shoring up that defense. So it's not the worst rush defense in the league like the way it was last year. It is one of the best, if not the best defense next year. And then you get back to a point where you have a top defense, you have a young offense that you're putting together, and then you see what you want to do a quarterback. Maybe the move is next year, and maybe it's also not coming in the draft. Maybe it's coming in free agency next year because you have guys like Kyler Murray and a whole bunch of guys that aren't satisfied with where they are in the NFL with their team. So there's always that possibility. But I totally get being anxious to find the next Ben Roethlisberger, but also again, they probably want to see what Mitch Trubisky has to offer. But like I said, next year there's going to be some different quarterbacks that are available. One of our listeners called in and asked a very interesting question about a guy who might be in that class next year. That's Miguel from Canada. Take a listen to his question about one of those quarterback prospects.
Hey, Chris, it's Miguel from Canada. I was just wondering, what have you thought about KJ Jefferson in next year's draft? He kind of reminds me a lot of Big Ben, except a bit more speed, and he's not like super consistent. So we could probably get him in like the middle rounds. We won't have to get him in the first round next year. Anyways, love the show. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Miguel. And that's a good question because again, next year's going to be a really interesting quarterback class. And Miguel's not guaranteed. Sorry, not Miguel. KJ Jefferson. For those who don't know, he's the starting quarterback for Arkansas. He stepped up this year as a sophomore. Had a decent season for them. I think Arkansas had actually one of their best seasons since 2011. I think it's their first 9-win season since 2011. Threw 21 touchdowns, 4 interceptions in his first year, 2,600 yards through the air. Also had 600 yards on the ground with 6 rushing touchdowns. He's a big-bodied guy, 6'3", 245, and looks like he can run. Now, and the things I saw on tape, he does have an arm on him. He can flick his wrist and get the ball 50 yards down the air or down the field. My biggest question is when teams are used to him in the SEC, how will he adjust? And next year will be a big telling year to see how he's improving in his game. And I would say there's no guarantee that he'd be in the class next year. But KJ Jefferson is one of those guys who could be a quick riser. If you read some of the guys that are, those people that are trying to be like the hard edge draft gurus of the future and not necessarily just focused on now, there's some people who think that he could be one of the biggest risers in their stock next season when he plays, and he could be a name that we're talking about. I mean, you think about it, Zachary Wilson just last year, no one was talking about him like he was going to be a top 5 pick the year before that. This year, Kenny Pickett was not a guy that was in these conversations. Malik Willis was not a guy who was in these conversations, before the season started, saying, oh yeah, he's definitely the guy that certain teams are going to gun for. It's the nature of things. Now, of course, I've said a lot. C.J. Stroud of Ohio State, Bryce Young of Alabama, they'll be there. Phil Dracovic of Boston College, we've talked about him on this very show. He's a kid from the Pittsburgh area. There's all guys like that. There's some bigger-bodied, big-armed, athletic guys who will be available next year. That's, again, why I'm sitting here saying the Steelers don't have to get desperate for a quarterback. They very well might and may think that this year is the year to go get a quarterback. And again, that's just about how they evaluate. All I can do is tell you how I evaluate this class. But KJ Jefferson, I'm intrigued by it. I want to see how he does next year before I say, oh yeah, go get that guy. But if he has a big year and he's playing in the SEC or playing with Arkansas, I'll love to see him compete. And if he puts up some numbers and he did some damage to Alabama through 3 touchdowns against them this past year, I'd like to see how they do and move forward. So we'll see how that plays out. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to answer 4 more questions of yours on the Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host Chris Carter. We're continuing to do our bonus episode where we took your calls on, and again, you could call in at any point in time, leave a voicemail. If you can't call because you're international, send us an email to LOSteelersTopicBag@gmail.com. Again, that's LOSteelersTopicBag at gmail.com. So if you do that, or you call in 412-223-6644, you can leave us a voicemail. Let us know what you think. Let us know what your question is. If we have time, we'll definitely get to it. Our next question is more of a general question about the Steelers. This comes from Larry in Westfield, New Jersey.
Hello, Chris, and hello to Tony West, Jenna, and the other cast members of your great podcast, lifetime Steelers fan. And I have this question for you. By the way, my name is Larry, and I'm calling from Westfield, New Jersey. So my question is about the overall prospects of the Steelers. Comparing this year's team to last year's team, already it's a much improved defense, much improved offensive line. The running game should be better with that improvement in the offensive line. They have a quarterback who can play 4 quarters instead of Ben, who last year could really only play 1 quarter. So last year they also was projected to be the hardest schedule in the league, and this year it's projected to be much easier. And last year they were still 2 games above 500, made the playoffs. Why are people not really giving the Steelers much of a chance to do great things this year? Comparing to last year, they should be 10-11 wins, just on the fact of what they've done so far. And then you add in a great draft, hopefully, and I can see the Steelers being really good this year. I'm just wondering why nobody sees it that way. Thank you.
Well, Larry, I see you're like a lot of Steelers fans who are very confident about the Steelers moving forward. And I say hey, there's a lot to be excited about what the Steelers are trying to do. What I will say, though, is if you're being honest about the Steelers' chances, there's a lot of question marks on the team right now. And I always look at positions when I'm going through season previews about different teams and I'm looking and weighing who they are. I look at question marks, check marks, and exclamation point. A question mark is a guy I'm not so sure or I have my doubts about. A check mark is a guy who's like Terrell Evans, like, hey, you're solid. I think you're going to do your job. You won't be a star player, but you can be a good role player for the team. And an exclamation point are the X Factor guys, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Minka Fitzpatrick, those type of guys, Ben in his prime, Antonio Brown in his prime. Those type of players do that. And the Steelers have a lot of question marks. You look along the offensive line. James Daniels, reason to be excited about him, but we don't know how he's going to fit. And the whole offensive line, they're going to have to gel this year. Kendrick Green is absolutely a question mark. Kevin Dotson is still a question mark. Dan Moore Jr. is still a question mark. Chukuma Okorafor, my book, closer to a check mark than people want to admit, but still a question mark. And that's the whole starting 5 of your offensive line with questions. And so that's not a given that they're going to just be better. They might be. I think they could be, and I think that they will, but that's a big question mark. Mitch Trubisky, a big question mark. Will he be better than Ben? I think he will because he's more athletic and he'll have a stronger arm than he did last year. But will he be able to read defenses? Will he be able to play within Matt Canada's system? We don't know. I think you got 2 exclamation points in Pat Frymuth and Najee Harris. I think you got 2 check marks in Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. So I'm not going to really say the offense is definitely going to be better. I think they could be better, but there's a lot that has to be proven. Defensively, they got to show they can stop the run again. They were terrible at doing it last year. Devin Bush, he's a question mark right now because you don't know how he'll be. I'm confident. I think he'll figure it out and he'll get back to a level of play that I think Steelers fans will appreciate. I think Miles Jack will be a very welcomed addition to that crew, but they got to see what's going on with Stephon Tuitt. Is he healthy? What'll happen there? And what'll go on with the defensive line's rotation if they take a couple injuries like they did last year? And then in the secondary, Keller Witherspoon, you like the addition of, but there's no pure CB1 who you're excited about and say, man, I can't wait to see that dude lock down the wide receiver 1 every single play. Unless you're a Steelers fan who just, you say that about every guy because you're just being a Steelers fan. And I totally get it. That's part of the fun of the game. But being realistic, there's a lot of question marks on this team. That's why people are questioning that. Now, that being said, if the draft goes a certain way, I think this could be a 10-win team. I think this could be a team that's competing for the division crown at the end of the regular season. Because I also think they were a half game back from it this year, and this was a rough year for them. So I certainly think that's in the realm of possibility, but I do understand why there's a lot of skeptics. And hey, I'm one of them. I'm not so sure everything's going to work out just so easy peasy. But I talked about Stephon Tuitt. We had another question from Andrew from Ohio asking about Stephon Tuitt. Take a listen.
Hey, Chris and Jenna. This is Andrew from Ohio, Steeler fan. To be honest with you, depending on what Stephon Tuitt does, that depends on if I go defense or not. I'm not sure if he's been at the voluntary workouts or not. I don't know. Maybe you could let me know. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Andrew, for your question. And I haven't seen pictures. The Steelers have been showing pictures of who's at voluntary workouts. The media is not allowed there, so we can't say who is and who isn't. Even if we were there, we weren't allowed to say unless someone told us. But I haven't seen the pictures of Stephon Tuitt being there. There's been a lot of guys who are there. Miles Jack is there. TJ Watt's there. There's a bunch of guys who've been there, but there's also a bunch of guys who aren't. I mean, one thing that Dale Lally of one of the guys that I talk to on the beat a lot, he always tells me, he's like, Troy Polamalu never came to voluntary workouts, that they're voluntary. People go do their own things. Devin Bush is working out in his own space because he knows he needs to work on certain things. That's just how it works. And so I wouldn't say Stephon Tuitt is definitely out yet, but we have been told that he's been in the facility, period. Maybe not for voluntary workouts, but just being in the facility. And I think that's a huge step for Stephon Tuitt. If he can be back and ready, that's a big deal. And if he is back, it does bring another answer to the defensive line. But we still got people who are interested in the defensive line prospects of this draft class. Here's Dean Rodriguez from Phoenix asking about how aggressive the Steelers should be in getting one Jordan Davis.
Hey, Chris, this is Dean Rodriguez from Phoenix, Arizona. And I just want to pose this question for you. With the Steelers, I know we have a lot going for the quarterback or safety, but I'm thinking in a different direction. That nothing in the backfield, nothing's going to matter as far as who we have for safety or corner if we don't fix our run defense. So I'm wondering your thoughts on the Steelers moving up to 13 to get Jordan Davis to solidify our defensive line. He's going anywhere from 14 to 20 to the Steelers if he hangs around that long. But if we don't fix that defensive line, especially going up against Joe Mixon and Chubb, and then the Ravens are going to fix their defenses or their offensive line and their running attack as well. Nothing we do in the backfield is going to matter if we're getting gashed for 175 yards a game again. Just want to know your thoughts on that, and love the show.
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate the call, and I kind of agree with that sentiment that they do need to make sure the run defense is fixed. Now, it could be fixed if Devin Bush is better and Miles Jack is better than Joe Schobert or Robert Spillane. It could be fixed if Stephon Tuitt is healthy and if Tyson Alualu is healthy and if Jordan Davis is added to that mix. I think that's a big part of it too. But they do need to fix the run defense, and I truly think if this team fixes the run defense and they force teams to have to get desperate in the air, it'll make the job easier for their guys in coverage, like Minkah Fitzpatrick, Terrell Edmonds, who they signed on Friday to a 1-year deal, Akella Witherspoon, Levi Wallace, Cam Sutton, and even Devin Bush and Miles Jack in coverage, because they're also guys who can be athletic enough to kind of play in the middle of the field and help there. So I do think Jordan Davis should be in the mix. I've advocated for that the Steelers should trade up for him if possible, or select him at 20 if he falls that far. It's going to be tricky though, because you got to wonder what's the best value. Because if you trade up for Jordan Davis, and when you could have gotten, maybe the number 3 corner of this class at 20, what would that have been? What would that have been worth? And if you can get a Travis Jones in the second round, would you be okay with passing up on a top corner when you could have also had another really good defensive tackle? Or do you say, hey, yeah, go get Jordan Davis? He's a freakish athlete. There's questions about his technique and some of the fundamentals to his game, but you'll take it for a guy who's 21 years old, is freakishly huge and freakishly fast and freakishly quick and all the freakishly talents out there. It just makes a lot of sense. And the Steelers love to take guys like that who are supremely athletic and show a lot of potential. So I wouldn't be against it at all. I don't think that you're on the wrong track at all. We'll see how the Steelers play it out this week. But there's other questions we have about guys later in the draft. I wanted to get to these questions here from some of our listeners. One listener, Andrew Zeminski, asked a question about the backup running back position, because I do think that's something the Steelers will address at one point or another here between now, either in the draft or in free agency before training camp happens, because I do think they would like to add a person to the room. Here is Andrew's question.
Hey, Chris Carter. This is Andrew Szymanski. I love following your Facebook page and your YouTube channel as well. My big question is, what do you think the likelihood is of them drafting another halfback to lessen the workload for Najee? I believe Pierce is a really good answer, but I think would have to use a third-round pick for him. Let me get your thoughts. Pierce is out of Florida, by the way, so I would hope to be on the channel. I'll be looking forward to seeing your next show. Have a good weekend.
Thank you for your question, Andrew. I do think the Steelers should address the running back position at some point. Benny Snell hasn't proven enough to be Najee's number 2. Anthony McFarland may be a nice secret weapon in Matt Canada's system that we will see, I guess, for the first real time, because we've heard that, half the playbook wasn't used because Ben Roethlisberger couldn't be mobile this year. And that's a good question. Now, here's the thing about Dameon Pierce. I like Dameon Pierce as a standard running back. I wouldn't take him in the 3rd round. I'd take him in the 4th with that compensatory pick if he's still around, if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers. But you look at where he graded out. He had a 4.59 40-yard dash. Not mad at that. That's pretty, a run of the mill with running backs. He's not overly big. He's just short of 5'10", but he's a guy that looks like he's quick. He's quick off the to get explosive. He seems to have good vision. I like those things about him, but he's not a dynamic back in one particular way. And so for him, he's going to have to combine all of those things pretty well, and sometimes that's really rare and hard to do when you look at the running back position. That's why they went and got Najee Harris in the 1st round, because he was a guy with supreme athletic factors to him who put all those things together as a running back. So, but in comparison, Dameon Pierce does grade out considerably better athletically than Benny Snell. The only thing that Benny Snell even tied him in as far as athletic numbers was they had the same broad jump at, I believe, 91 inches. So that's something to consider there. I wouldn't think the Steelers would go at running back early in this draft. They have other positions that they need, but I could see them going day 3 at some point, adding a running back to the room and just seeing what happens. And if they don't feel like the value's there at any of those picks, they might go in free agency and sign a guy there as well. We have one more question about the safety position and talking about trading back. I want to get to this person. Bruce Stack from Fort Benning, Florida, had this to ask.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me on the show. My name's Bruce Stack. I grew up in Beaver Falls, but I'm calling in from Fort Benning, Georgia. I listen to the show every day on my way into work and generally agree with what you have to say. I wanted to pose a couple questions to you. One, I love that in all of your mock drafts, you're going after Cam Hayward's little brother. I love that the Steelers try to keep families together in that sense. So that leads into my question at safety. What are your thoughts on a guy like Quentin Lake, whose dad was a pretty notorious safety for the Steelers back in the 90s, and then also as a defensive coordinator? Me personally, I think him coming out of UCLA, he plays with a lot of high IQ plays. He may not have all the physical traits you want, but the guy just knows the game, and you can tell that he grew up with that NFL pedigree. And then the second one on that would be, I think someone like Jaquan Brisker might be a great addition to the Steelers. So what are your thoughts on, instead of the Steelers trading up, trying to grab a player who might be a bit of a reach, what if they try to trade down with someone who's a wide receiver DB team like Kansas City, trade back into like that 31 spot, pick up some second-round capital? Been a big fan, like I said, out of Beaver Falls. And again, thanks for what you do, and appreciate you having me on the show.
Thanks for your call. Also, I apologize. Fort Benning, Georgia. Apparently, I heard Florida when I was making that card, and that was my mistake there. But to answer your question, Bruce, one on Quentin Lake. Yes, the Steelers do like to bring in guys that have family ties to the NFL. Part of this is very strategic. It's not a oh, we just love families type of thing. It's more like a, hey, this guy knows a guy that knows what it takes to be in the NFL every single day, because that is a grind. And I've heard Mike Tomlin talk about this before. I've heard other NFL people talk about it before, but it's getting to the NFL. Even when you're in college, there is a daily grind to your type of work. But when you get to the NFL, that grind increases, and there's approaches to things that they don't come naturally. There's something that you learn, and there's a lot of people who you think are really talented, and they don't figure out their approach or how to handle the NFL or how to handle being a professional, and their career goes by the wayside. It happens every year, and it happens all the time. So when you get a guy who you're thinking like Trey Edmonds, Terrell Edmonds' brother, who's a running back / special teamer for the Steelers, he knows, because both of his brothers are also in the NFL, there's a better chance that he's going to have an understanding like, hey, this is what it takes to be in the NFL. This is what it takes to do the little things. That's they like the Watt brothers. Now TJ Watt is a superstar, but Derek Watt also was good in another team before he came to the Steelers. But again, they like guys like that. Now where Quentin Lake falls in this one, Carnell Lake is a very much a valued member of the Steelers. As a kid, I used to watch Carnell Lake play amazing at safety. He took over at cornerback the year that Rod Woodson tore his ACL in I think it was '95 on their way to the Super Bowl, and he was a versatile playmaker for the Steelers. Never gets credit for being as good as he was for his time. Also was a good defensive mind, and that's why he was a coach with the Steelers for a bit there. But Carnell Lake, his son Quentin Lake, the thing about Quentin Lake is that like you said, his athletic traits don't match up there. Now he ran a 4.59 in the 40-yard dash. Again, not the end all be all, because Kyle Hamilton also ran a 4.59, but Kyle Hamilton's also 6'4" and has a ton of big plays and is, and a lot of things that show his pedigree and a lot of things that show those instincts. Now, I like some of the things that I've seen of Quentin Lake. I won't say that I've studied him a lot. I have looked at him because I was like, oh yeah, there's that. And he looks just like his dad. It's ridiculous. But when you look at Quentin Lake and you look at his tape, you're like, okay, he's definitely a late day 3 type of guy. I don't foresee the Steelers drafting him. I would see him being more of an undrafted free agent. I've been saying Connor Hayward because, again, Connor Hayward, the sort of H-back prospect out of Michigan State, Cam Hayward's little brother. I like Connor. I've liked Connor Hayward for a while. He has good ball skills when he goes up and gets the football. I saw him catch a really good pass, a touchdown pass against Pitt in the Peach Bowl. I've watched him make some highlight plays. He can jump over guys. He can run through guys. He can block guys. I just think that he would be one of those guys that could fill a third tight end spot while also being an additional fullback, while also helping out on special teams. And Mike Tomlin likes those type of guys. So I would say the Steelers would want to take a crack at him in the 7th round. Quentin Lake could be a guy that if he's floating around as an undrafted free agent, the Steelers might call up and be like, hey, we know your dad, we know your pedigree, come in here. And it'll be the same sort of thing. It's like, hey, you know what it takes to be a Steeler because your dad knows what it takes to be an NFL player, not just a Steeler. But your dad, you were raised by your dad. You have that insight from him. We're going to take the chance on you at that point. I just don't think that he's a guy that you want to take late. And I also think that, like you said, with Jaquan Brisker or guys like that, they with their safety situation, especially with Edmonds on a 1-year deal, they want to add a safety in this draft who's going to have a better chance to start. They already got the late 7th round safety in Trey Norwood last year. I think it's a better idea to go for that guy earlier in the draft this year. Again, set yourself up with a 3 safety look. And again, I think it's a good idea to trade back, because if you can trade back, again, if one of those star players that you think are superstar players that you can get at 20 aren't there, definitely look to see if you could trade back and get an extra pick, because again, I think if you get 2 players in the top 40 picks this year, you're going to get 2 guys that you really like who could become long-term assets to the Steelers as they rebuild and try to retool themselves to become a Super Bowl contender over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years. So all that being said, great questions from everyone. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. This has been a bonus episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can check this show out on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, or YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to it if you want to get all of our daily YouTube updates Monday through Friday for episodes, as well as our breaking news updates and our bonus episodes like this one. I'll be back Monday talking more about your Pittsburgh Steelers, getting you ready for the draft, for the final mock draft Monday. Don't forget to get your mock drafts in on the Locked On Steelers Facebook group. Post it under the post that I made in that group. So if you want to be in the competition, you can also tweet it at me at Carter Critiques on Twitter. Thanks again. I'll see y'all Monday.